The passbook hit the counter with a slap that echoed through the marble lobby like a gunshot. My son's face went white. My daughter-in-law gripped the edge of the teller station, knuckles bone pale. The bank manager looked from them to me, then back to the numbers on the screen, and I watched reality crack open in their eyes. This is the moment I'd been building toward for 6 months. The moment when the woman they'd called senile, broke, incapable, would show them exactly who controlled the narrative. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up here, in this Chicago First National branch on a Tuesday morning with my entire family's lies unraveling in public, you need to know where this started. 3 months earlier, on a Sunday afternoon that smelled like cinnamon and betrayal. The kitchen was warm that day, sunlight pooling on the old Formica countertops I'd scrubbed 1,000 times. I was making my famous apple pie, the one my son Daniel used to beg for as a kid. The recipe was my mother's, passed down through 3 generations, written on a yellowed index card in her careful cursive. I'd made it so many times I didn't need to look at the measurements anymore. My hands knew the exact ratio of butter to flour for the crust, the precise amount of cinnamon that would make the filling sing without overwhelming the tartness of the Granny Smith apples. The kitchen smelled like comfort, like every good memory I had of motherhood distilled into cinnamon and brown sugar. The landline rang while my hands were dusted with flour, and I almost didn't answer. I wish I hadn't. I wiped my hands on my apron, the blue gingham one Daniel had given me for Mother's Day 15 years ago, back when he still put thought into gifts instead of just transferring money he probably couldn't afford. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Linda, from fraud prevention. Her voice had that practiced sympathy customer service reps learn, the kind that tells you something's already gone wrong before they explain what. "Mrs. Chen," she said, and I could hear the caution in her tone, the way people speak when they're about to deliver bad news. "I need to verify some account activity with you. There's been a withdrawal that's triggered our fraud alert system." My heart started beating faster, that primal response to danger even when you don't understand it yet. The wooden spoon I'd been holding clattered into the mixing bowl, sending up a small cloud of flour. "What kind of withdrawal?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, thin and distant. "A withdrawal of $15,000, she said. "Processed yesterday afternoon at our Michigan Avenue branch. Did you authorize this transaction, Mrs. Chen?" The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the counter, feeling the cool laminate under my palm, grounding myself against the vertigo. My chest tightened like someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribs. Each breath became work, had to be consciously pulled into my lungs. $15,000. That was nearly half my savings, money I'd scraped together from 40 years of teaching elementary school, from summer jobs at the public library, from every birthday check I'd ever received and tucked away instead of spending. I thought about those years of teaching. The lesson plans I'd crafted on Sunday evenings, the supplies I'd bought with my own money because the school budget never stretched far enough, the extra tutoring sessions I'd done for free because some kids just needed more time. I thought about the library summers, shelving books in the dusty basement where the air conditioning never quite reached, my hands dry and cracked from the paper and dust. I thought about my mother's birthday checks, $20 here, $50 there, always with a note that said, "Save this for something special." "No," I told Linda, my voice coming out strangled. "No, I didn't authorize anything. I haven't been to that branch in months. I do all my banking at the location near my apartment." There was silence on the other end, the kind of pause that means someone is choosing their words carefully. "I'm going to start an investigation immediately, Mrs. Chen," Linda said. "In the meantime, I'm placing a hold on your account to prevent any further unauthorized activity. Can you come into a branch tomorrow to file a formal report and provide handwriting samples?" The investigation took 3 days. 3 days that felt like 3 years. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that number, $15,000, flashing like neon in the darkness. I'd lie in bed in my small apartment on the north side, listening to the L train rumble past every 20 minutes, and I'd calculate what that money meant. 2 years of property taxes, 3 years of groceries, the emergency fund I'd built in case I got sick, in case something broke. In case life threw one of those curveballs it's so fond of throwing at people my age. I barely ate during those 3 days. Food tasted like cardboard, like ashes. That metallic taste coated my tongue every time I tried to swallow. The taste of adrenaline and fear that my body couldn't process. I lost 4 pounds, which I couldn't afford to lose. At 68, I was already thin, my clothes hanging a little looser than they should. My neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, knocked on my door the second evening, concerned because she hadn't seen me on my usual morning walk. "Are you all right, Clara?" she asked, her roomy eyes scanning my face with the practiced concern of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize suffering. "I'm fine," I lied, just a little under the weather. When Linda called back on the third day, I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "Mrs. Chen," she said, and I knew from her tone that the news wasn't good. "We've completed our initial investigation. The withdrawal was made with a signed authorization form. I have the signature here, and our handwriting analyst has compared it to the samples on file. It's a very close match." My hands started shaking. "What do you mean, a close match? It's either my signature or it isn't." "That's the thing, Mrs. Chen," Linda said, and I could hear the discomfort in her voice. "It's close enough that our system accepted it. But I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've seen a lot of forgeries. This one is very, very good. Whoever did this had access to multiple samples of your signature and practiced extensively." She paused. "Do you have any family members who might have had access to your financial documents?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I thought about the boxes of old papers in my hall closet, decades of tax returns and bank statements I'd kept because my Depression-era parents had taught me to keep everything. I thought about the times Daniel had helped me with my taxes, sitting at this same kitchen table with my documents spread out around him. I thought about the keys to my apartment I'd given both my sons, for emergencies, for when I was traveling, for because they were my children, and I trusted them with everything. "I have 2 sons," I told Linda, my voice barely above a whisper. "But they would never." I couldn't finish the sentence, because even as I was saying it, doubt was creeping in like cold water, filling all the spaces where certainty used to live. Linda was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to send you copies of the withdrawal slip and the signature," she said. "Look at them carefully. And Mrs. Chen, I recommend you consider filing a police report. Even if it turns out to be a misunderstanding, it's better to have the documentation." The documents arrived by email an hour later. I opened them on my old laptop, the one Daniel had set up for me years ago when he still pretended to care, when he still called every Sunday just to check in. The withdrawal slip was standard bank bureaucracy, all black and white and official stamps, but the signature at the bottom made my blood run cold. It was mine, the exact loop of my capital C, the way my L tilted slightly backward, the little flourish I added to the tail of my Y without even thinking about it. But it wasn't mine. I know my own hand the way I know my own face in the mirror. There was something infinitesimally off about the pressure, the angle, the flow of ink. Someone had studied my signature. Someone had practiced it. Someone close enough to have access to old checks, old letters, old birthday cards signed with love. The realization hit me like cold water. Daniel. The knowledge arrived not as a thought, but as a certainty that settled in my bones. "I know you're thinking what I was thinking. You're screaming at your screen right now, aren't you? Telling me it was obvious, telling me to call the police immediately. But when it's your family, when it's your son, when it's the baby you held in your arms 35 years ago, promising to always protect him, always love him, always be there for him, the rules change. Logic becomes paralyzed by love. I didn't confront Daniel immediately. Instead, I did what any mother would do. I made excuses. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe the handwriting analyst was wrong. Maybe someone at the bank had access to my information. Maybe Daniel had taken the money for some emergency he was too proud to tell me about, some crisis I didn't know about, and he'd pay it back with an embarrassed apology. Maybe. The word became a prayer I whispered to myself at night, lying in bed in my small apartment, watching shadows from passing cars slide across my ceiling. But the excuses started wearing thin when I actually looked at what had been happening over the past year. I pulled out my bank statements, spread them across my kitchen table, and started going through them line by line with the same methodical attention I'd once used to grade spelling tests. There were small withdrawals I'd overlooked. $200 here, $500 there. Nothing large enough to trigger fraud alerts, but adding up over months to thousands of dollars I couldn't account for. Daniel lived in Lincoln Park now, in one of those renovated brownstones with the original crown molding and skylights. I'd been to the house a handful of times, always feeling vaguely uncomfortable in the pristine space with its hardwood floors and carefully curated artwork. He'd told me he got a promotion at his tech startup, that business was booming, that he'd finally hit his stride after years of struggling. When he'd asked to borrow money 2 years ago for the down payment, I'd given it to him without hesitation. $20,000 from the small inheritance my mother had left me. Money I'd been saving for retirement, for emergencies, for the bakery I'd always dreamed of opening. "I'll pay you back within a year, Mom," he'd promised, hugging me tight in my little apartment. "This is going to change everything for us." Jessica and I have been looking for a place to raise Lily properly, somewhere with good schools, somewhere stable. You're literally making our dreams come true. I'd cried that day. Happy tears, I thought. Grateful tears that I could help my son build the life he wanted. I was still waiting for that payback. 2 years later, not a single payment, and whenever I gently mentioned it, Daniel would get that tight look around his eyes and change the subject. I started noticing other things I'd overlooked before, or maybe I'd seen them and made excuses. Filed them away under things mothers don't question. The way he'd stopped inviting me to family dinners, except for major holidays. The way his wife, Jessica, would change the subject whenever I asked about their finances, her smile going fixed and plastic. The way my granddaughter Lily had new everything, new iPad, new clothes that still had creases from the package, new bedroom furniture I'd glimpsed through her doorway, all while Daniel claimed money was tight and he couldn't pay me back yet. The second clue came on a Thursday, 3 weeks after that first fraud call. I'd stopped by their house unannounced because Lily had left her reading glasses at my place after our weekly tutoring session. I'd been helping her with her reading comprehension, spending every Wednesday afternoon going through books together, watching her grow from a struggling first grader to a confident second grader who could tackle chapter books. Those afternoons were the highlight of my week, the one time I felt truly useful, truly needed. Nobody answered the front door when I rang the bell, but I could hear voices in the backyard. Loud voices. The kind that carry when people think they're alone. I walked around the side of the house, past the garden Jessica was always posting about on Instagram. All perfect roses and artfully arranged herb boxes that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. The gate was open, and I could see them through the gap. Daniel, Jessica, and Daniel's younger brother Marcus, huddled around the expensive teak patio table like a war council planning strategy. I caught only fragments before they noticed me, but those fragments were enough. "Trust fund," Jessica was saying, her voice sharp with frustration. "We can't access it until she's incapacitated or dead, legally declared incompetent or—" She stopped when Marcus pointed in my direction, his face going pale. Daniel's head whipped around. My name hung in the air between us, unspoken but heavy. They scattered the papers like teenagers caught with contraband, Jessica sweeping them into a folder with movements that were just a fraction too quick, too panicked. Daniel's smile was too bright, too fast, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "Mom," he said, standing up and walking toward me with his arms outstretched like he was going to hug me. "What are you doing here? Why didn't you call?" The question felt like an accusation, like I'd committed some crime by showing up at my own son's house. I held up the glasses case, suddenly feeling like an intruder in my own son's life, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "Just dropping these off for Lily." I tried to smile, tried to make it feel normal, but my heart was pounding. I could see Marcus over Daniel's shoulder, still frozen at the table, his expression guilty and trapped. The air between us felt thick, charged with something unspoken, something dangerous. Jessica took the glasses from me with a thank you that sounded like dismissal. Her perfectly manicured hand was shaking slightly. She wouldn't meet my eyes, and I realized with a jolt of recognition that this was the same woman who used to call me Mom, who used to ask my advice about parenting, who used to send me thoughtful birthday cards with handwritten notes about how lucky she was to have me in her life. "Is everything okay?" I asked, looking from Daniel to Jessica to Marcus, trying to understand what I'd interrupted. "You all look stressed." "Just work stuff," Daniel said too quickly. "Startup problems, nothing to worry about. You know how it is, always some crisis." He laughed, but it sounded hollow. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. I stood there for another awkward moment, waiting for someone to invite me in, offer me coffee, ask me to stay and visit with Lily. None of that happened. Instead, Jessica glanced at her watch and said, "We actually have a call in a few minutes, a conference call for Daniel's work. Do you mind if—" I left. I walked back to my car parked on their perfect tree-lined street, got in, and sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Something was very, very wrong. I could feel it in my gut, that mother's instinct that had warned me when Daniel was lying about breaking the neighbor's window at age 10, when Marcus was hiding bad grades in 7th grade. But this felt bigger, darker, more dangerous than childhood lies. I thought that was the revelation, that moment in the backyard was the smoking gun. I thought I understood then what was happening. But the bank statement I found in my mailbox 2 weeks later would prove it was only the tip of the iceberg. Another withdrawal. Another $7,000. Same forged signature. Same Michigan Avenue branch. Same careful crime, executed with the confidence of someone who thought they'd gotten away with it once and could keep getting away with it. This time, I didn't call the fraud department. This time, I didn't make excuses. This time, I sat at my kitchen table with that statement in my shaking hands and felt something shift inside me, something fundamental and irreversible. Grief is heavy, makes you sink into yourself, makes you want to curl up in the darkness and disappear. But rage, the cold kind that calculates and plans, the kind that thinks instead of just feels, that kind of rage makes you sharp. It makes you focused. It makes you dangerous. I stopped being the crying mother and became something else entirely, something they should have been afraid of. I pulled out my old laptop and started searching. Financial abuse, elderly parents. The results filled my screen, page after page of articles, forum posts, legal resources. I learned that what was happening to me had a name, multiple names actually. Financial exploitation, elder abuse, predatory theft by family members. I learned that it happens more often than anyone wants to admit, that adult children stealing from aging parents is one of the fastest growing crimes in America, and that it almost never gets reported because the victims are too ashamed, too heartbroken, too afraid of destroying what's left of their families. Forged signatures, family members. I clicked through links to legal advice sites, read case studies that could have been written about my own life. An 80-year-old man whose daughter had drained his account to fund her gambling addiction. A 75-year-old woman whose son had taken out credit cards in her name and left her with $60,000 in debt. A widower who discovered his children had been stealing his deceased wife's jewelry and selling it piece by piece. The stories were endless, heartbreaking, familiar. Legal recourse, adult children theft. This search led me down darker paths, into forums where lawyers discussed prosecution strategies, where victims shared their experiences of taking their own children to court. The language was cold and clinical, talking about evidence gathering and witness testimony and the difficulty of proving intent when family members had legitimate access to homes and documents. But underneath the legal jargon, I could feel the pain radiating from every post, every comment, every desperate question about whether it was worth destroying your family to get justice. The screen glowed blue in the darkness of my apartment, and with every article I read, every forum post from other victims, the picture became clearer. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Systematic theft by people who were supposed to love me, who were supposed to protect me, who I had sacrificed everything to raise and nurture and launch into the world. I found an article in a psychology journal that made me stop cold. The Impact of Financial Abuse on Elderly Victims, it was titled, written by researchers from Northwestern University. I read it twice, then a third time, highlighting passages that felt like they'd been written about me specifically. Victims of financial abuse by family members experience rates of depression 3 times higher than their peers, the article stated. The betrayal by trusted loved ones creates a unique psychological trauma that combines financial stress with the grief of lost relationships. Common symptoms include persistent anxiety, difficulty sleeping, loss of appetite, social withdrawal, and a phenomenon the researchers called reality dissociation, where victims begin to doubt their own perceptions and memories. Reality dissociation. The term jumped out at me like a physical thing, a diagnosis I hadn't known I needed. That was what Daniel had been doing, systematically and deliberately, every time he told me I was confused, every time he insisted I'd agreed to things I had no memory of agreeing to. He'd been making me doubt my own mind, my own memories, my own fundamental grasp on truth. And it had been working. I'd been feeling it for months without naming it. The fog in my brain that made simple decisions feel overwhelming. The exhaustion that went bone deep and wouldn't lift no matter how much I slept. The way I'd stopped caring about things that used to bring me joy. My little bakery dream, the one I'd shelved when I got married, when I had kids, when life became about everyone else's needs instead of my own wants. I'd told myself I was too old, too tired, too set in my ways to start something new at 68. But that wasn't age talking. That was what they'd been doing to me, systematically, deliberately, wearing down my confidence and my sense of self until I became easy to steal from, easy to manipulate, easy to control. Have you ever doubted your own sanity? Have you ever had someone you love look you straight in the eye and tell you you're remembering wrong, you're confused, you're making things up? That's what happened when I finally confronted Daniel, 3 days after finding that second statement. I'd spent those days gathering courage, writing out what I wanted to say, practicing in front of my bathroom mirror like I was preparing for a parent-teacher conference with a particularly difficult parent. I drove to Lincoln Park on a Saturday morning, taking the scenic route along the lake because I needed the extra time to steady my nerves. The water was gray and choppy, matching my mood. Sailboats dotted the horizon, and I thought about how peaceful they looked from a distance, how you couldn't see from shore whether the people on board were happy or miserable, whether they were sailing toward something or running away. He was in his garage, working on his vintage motorcycle, the one he'd bought last year with money he definitely didn't have. It was a beautiful machine, all chrome and black leather, the kind of toy men buy when they're trying to recapture their youth or prove something to themselves. The garage smelled like motor oil and expensive metal, and classic rock was playing from speakers I couldn't see. Daniel was bent over the engine, his hands black with grease, completely absorbed in whatever mechanical problem he was solving. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, and I felt a surge of complicated emotion I couldn't name. This was my baby, the child I'd rocked through colic, walked through nightmares, cheered for at soccer games and school plays. The teenager I'd stayed up late with, helping him study for exams, talking him through his first heartbreak, co-signing his student loans because I believed in him. The man who'd stood at my husband's funeral and held my hand and promised me I'd never be alone. When had that person become someone who could steal from me without remorse? I handed him the bank statements without preamble, my rehearsed speech evaporating in the face of his oil-stained hands and confused expression. Want to explain these? My voice came out harder than I'd intended, sharp with barely controlled anger. He barely glanced at them before his face shifted into an expression I'd never seen before, something between irritation and calculation, like he was running through possible responses and choosing the most effective one. "Mom, you're confused," he said, setting down his wrench with careful precision. "We talked about this, remember? You called me about 3 months ago, worried about managing your accounts. You said you were having trouble keeping track of everything, that the online banking was too complicated." He smiled at me, sympathetic and concerned, the way you'd smile at a child who'd forgotten their homework. "You asked me to help you, to handle some transactions for you. Don't you remember?" The lies came so smoothly, so confidently, with such an air of patient concern, that for a split second I almost believed him. That's what gaslighting does. It makes you question the evidence right in front of your face, makes you wonder if maybe you are the crazy one. Maybe you did forget. Maybe your memory is going and you're embarrassing yourself by making accusations you can't back up. Almost. But I'd prepared for this. I'd spent 3 days writing everything down, creating a timeline, documenting every conversation, because I knew he'd try to rewrite history. I knew him. I'd raised him. I knew how smart he was, how persuasive, how good at making people believe whatever version of reality he wanted them to believe. I pulled out my notebook with shaking hands, the cheap spiral-bound kind I'd used for lesson plans for 40 years. My handwriting filled the pages, neat and careful, dates and amounts, and direct quotes from our conversations. "I never asked you to manage anything," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "These are forged signatures, Daniel. Look at them, really look at them. This is theft." I watched his face as I said it, watched the mask start to crack, watched calculation give way to something colder. His expression hardened then, the pretense of concern evaporating like morning fog in sunlight. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag stained with motor oil, and I realized how much bigger than me he was. How the little boy I used to carry was now a 6-foot man who could physically intimidate me if he chose to. The thought sent ice down my spine. "Fine," he said, his voice flat and cold in a way I'd never heard before. "You want the truth? Let's talk about truth, Mom. You're going to lose that money anyway when you get older and can't take care of yourself," he continued, crossing his arms over his chest. "You're already forgetting things. Last month, you asked me the same question 3 times in one phone call. You left the stove on twice that I know of. Jessica said you showed up at Lily's school on the wrong day for the parent-teacher conference." He ticked off items like he was presenting evidence at a trial, like he'd been building a case against me for months. "We're just accessing what's rightfully ours a little early, before you blow it all or some con artist gets to you first. Rightfully theirs." The words hit me like a slap. My life savings, my security, my decades of work, of sacrifice, of carefully saving every spare dollar. My emergency fund, my retirement cushion, my bakery dream fund. Rightfully theirs. "You put me through college," he continued, and now his voice had taken on a defensive edge, like he was justifying himself to himself as much as to me. "You helped with the house down payment." "Wait, no. You gave me money for the house, and I'm grateful, but that doesn't mean I owe you forever. This is just an extension of that, right? Family takes care of family. You've always said that. You've always said everything you have will be ours someday anyway. So what's the difference if we access it now when we actually need it? The words were so close to things I had said over the years, twisted just enough to sound like permission, like I'd agreed to this systematic theft. "That's not what I meant," I whispered, and I hated how weak my voice sounded, how small I felt in that garage that smelled like his expensive hobby. "You know that's not what I meant." He shrugged, picking up his wrench again, dismissing me with the gesture. "Doesn't matter what you meant, Mom. What matters is we're family, and you need to let this go before you do something you'll regret. Before you destroy this family over money. Before I destroy this family. Not him, with his theft and his lies and his calculated cruelty. Me, for having the audacity to object to being robbed." I left without another word because if I'd stayed, I would have said things I couldn't take back. Or maybe I would have collapsed right there on his oil-stained concrete floor, and I couldn't give him that satisfaction. I wouldn't let him see me break. The drive home was a blur of tears and red lights and near misses as I tried to navigate Chicago traffic while my vision swam. I don't remember parking in my building's garage. I don't remember walking up the 3 flights to my apartment because the elevator was broken again. I just remember sitting on my couch, that worn blue couch I'd had since Daniel was in high school, the one where I'd read him bedtime stories and helped him with homework and held him when he cried about his father leaving. I sat there and felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life, more alone than when my husband walked out, more alone than when my mother died, because at least then I'd had my sons to lean on. Or so I'd thought. My phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through my fog of misery. It was Marcus. I stared at the screen for 3 rings before I answered, some part of me hoping he was calling to apologize, to tell me he'd tried to stop Daniel, to offer me the support one of my sons should be offering. "Don't make a big deal out of this," he said without preamble, without even a hello, and I felt my last hope die. "Daniel's stressed enough with work and the house and everything. He's doing the best he can. You'll get your money eventually, probably. I mean, it's not like you need it right now anyway. Just let it go, Mom. Let it go before you make things worse. Make things worse. Like they could get worse than discovering both my sons were conspiring to steal from me, that they'd been planning this for months, maybe years. How long?" I asked, my voice coming out strange and hollow. "How long have you known? How long have you been part of this?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Does it matter?" he finally said. "Look, Mom, I know you're upset, but think about what you're risking here. You go to the cops or whatever, you ruin Daniel's life, you ruin my life probably, and for what? Money you don't even need right now? Is that really worth losing both your sons over?" They'd planned this. Both of my sons. Maybe Jessica too. Maybe Marcus's wife Stephanie. A family conspiracy, and I was the mark, the target, the victim they thought was too old and too soft and too devoted to fight back. The realization settled over me like a cold blanket, numbing and clarifying at the same time. "You've already lost me," I told Marcus, my voice steady now, empty of emotion. "You both have." I hung up before he could respond, before he could say something else that would hurt, before I could hear any more about how their theft was actually my fault, my problem, my responsibility to forgive and forget. But here's what they didn't know about me, what they'd forgotten in their arrogance and their greed. They saw a 68-year-old retired teacher, someone soft and easily manipulated, someone who'd spent her life nurturing and giving and putting other people's needs first. They forgot that I'd spent 40 years managing classrooms full of children who tested boundaries for a living, who tried every trick and manipulation and excuse to get out of consequences. They forgot that I'd negotiated union contracts, stood up to administrators twice my size, who tried to bully teachers into accepting unfair terms, survived a contentious divorce when their father left me for his secretary, and tried to claim he deserved half of everything I'd saved. They forgot that the gentleness I'd shown them their entire lives wasn't weakness, it was choice. I'd chosen to be kind, to be generous, to put their needs ahead of my own wants, because that's what mothers do, that's what love looks like in action. But love isn't infinite. Love isn't unconditional. Not when it's being weaponized against you, used as a tool to manipulate and control and steal. And I was choosing something different now. I was choosing myself. I started with research, real research, the kind that involved private investigators and lawyers and forensic accountants. Chicago has no shortage of professionals who specialize in financial fraud. And the first attorney I consulted, a sharp woman named Patricia Hu with an office in the Loop, listened to my story with the kind of focused attention that told me she'd heard versions of it before. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and glasses that made her look like she'd just stepped out of a courtroom drama. "This is more common than you'd think," she said after I'd finished talking. After I'd laid out the bank statements and the timeline and the recordings I'd made of Daniel's and Marcus's phone calls, once I realized I needed evidence. She slid a tissue box across her polished mahogany desk, even though I wasn't crying anymore. I'd run out of tears somewhere between her building's lobby and her 19th floor office. Adult children who feel entitled to their parents' assets. Some of them rationalize it as an early inheritance. Some convince themselves their parents are incapable of managing money. Some just need cash and see their aging parents as an easy source. "The law is very clear, though," Patricia continued, pulling out a legal pad and making notes as she talked. "This is forgery and theft, regardless of relationship. The fact that they're family members doesn't give them any special right to your money. Actually, in Illinois, financial exploitation of an elderly person carries enhanced penalties. We can pursue both criminal charges and civil remedies." She looked up at me over her glasses. "The question is, what do you want out of this?" I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again because I didn't know. What did I want? Did I want my sons in prison? Did I want them to suffer the way they'd made me suffer? Did I want them to lose their homes, their jobs, their freedom? The thought should have filled me with horror, but all I felt was a cold, calm emptiness. "Not just legally," Patricia prompted gently. "What outcome would let you sleep at night? What would give you peace?" I thought about that question for days, for weeks. Patricia had given me her card and told me to call when I was ready to proceed, that there was no rush, that this kind of decision couldn't be made in her office in a single afternoon. I went home and I thought about what justice looked like. Did I want my son in jail? Did I want him to lose everything the way he'd tried to make me lose everything? Or did I want something else, something that would hurt worse than any legal consequence? I wanted him to know what it felt like to be powerless, to be dismissed, to watch everything he'd built crumble while the person he'd underestimated held all the cards. I wanted him to understand, really understand, the magnitude of what he'd done. And I wanted to make sure he could never do it to anyone else. That realization came to me late one night as I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the L train rumble past. This wasn't just about me. It was about protecting other potential victims, about holding Daniel and Marcus accountable not just for what they'd done, but for what they might do in the future if they learned they could get away with this. The investigation Patricia launched was thorough and methodical and expensive, though she agreed to work on contingency, meaning she'd get paid from whatever we recovered. She hired a private investigator named Robert Chen, a former Chicago PD detective who'd gone private after 20 years on the force. He was in his 50s, quiet and observant, with the kind of patient methodology that uncovers truths people work very hard to bury. Robert's first report arrived 2 weeks after I hired him. A thick manila folder full of photographs and documents and timelines that made my stomach turn. He'd found the practice signatures in Daniel's home office, hidden in a folder labeled Tax Documents 2019-2021. Sheets and sheets of my signature, practiced over and over like a student learning cursive, getting progressively closer to the original until they were nearly indistinguishable. The sight of them made me physically ill. I had to put the folder down and walk away, breathe through the nausea that rose in my throat. He'd found emails between Daniel and Jessica discussing my cognitive decline, a fiction they'd created to justify their actions to themselves and apparently to Marcus. In one email from 6 months ago, Daniel wrote, Mom called 3 times yesterday asking about Thanksgiving plans. We already told her twice. Jessica's response, maybe it's time. She's clearly getting worse. We should probably move faster before she does something really dangerous, like leave the stove on and burn the building down. The casual cruelty of it, the calculated lies, the way they'd taken normal behaviors, things anyone might do, and twisted them into evidence of incompetence. Robert found Marcus's Venmo transactions, showing Daniel had been splitting the stolen money with him. Regular payments of $1,000 or $2,000 with captions like, "Thanks bro" and "Family first." He found receipts for things they'd bought with my money: Daniel's motorcycle, Jessica's designer handbag collection, a weekend trip to Napa Valley, private swim lessons for Lily at some exclusive club. They'd been living well off my savings while telling me they couldn't afford to pay back the loan I'd given them. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source: Jessica's sister, Amanda. She showed up at my apartment on a rainy Wednesday evening in April, looking like guilt personified. I'd met her a handful of times at family events. Always thought she seemed nice if a little quiet, always standing slightly apart from the rest of the family like she didn't quite fit. She was younger than Jessica by about 5 years, worked as a social worker, and had kind eyes that were now red-rimmed and desperate. "I couldn't keep it in anymore," she said when I opened the door, her words tumbling out before I could even invite her in. "I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, kept thinking about you alone in this apartment while they just..." She broke down then, right there in my doorway, and I found myself in the surreal position of comforting the sister of the woman who'd helped my son rob me. "Come in," I said, guiding her to the blue couch, the same couch where I'd cried after confronting Daniel. "Sit down. Tell me what you know." The confession poured out of her like water from a broken dam. She'd known for over a year, had found out accidentally when she'd used Jessica's laptop and seen an email exchange about accessing my accounts. "I told Jessica this was wrong," Amanda said, mascara running down her face in black rivulets. "I told her you didn't deserve this, that it was elder abuse, that she could go to prison. But she just kept saying it was family business, that you'd never find out, that you were going to leave them everything anyway, so what did it matter if they took it early?" She broke down then, full-body sobs that shook her shoulders, and I sat there feeling oddly detached, like I was watching this scene happen to someone else. "How long?" I asked when her sobs had quieted to hiccups. "How long were they planning this?" Amanda wiped her eyes with the tissue I handed her. "At least a year of serious planning," she said. But Daniel had been talking about it longer than that, joking about it at first, then getting more serious. He'd researched what signatures banks would accept, how to avoid fraud triggers, what amounts would go unnoticed. "This wasn't impulsive, Mrs. Chen. This was calculated." She handed me printed emails, text messages between Jessica and Daniel, between Daniel and Marcus, a paper trail of their contempt. I forced myself to read them, even though every word felt like a knife. In one message, Jessica called me a resource to be managed. In another, Daniel joked about me being too old to fight back, too devoted to my family to ever press charges even if I found out. They'd counted on my love to protect them from consequences. They'd weaponized my devotion. There was one text exchange that I've never been able to forget that still wakes me up sometimes in the middle of the night. It was from Marcus to Daniel, sent about 3 months before the first withdrawal. "You really think she won't notice?" Daniel's response. "Even if she does, what's she going to do? Call the cops on her own sons? She still makes my favorite pie every time I visit, man. She's not going to risk losing us." Marcus. "Fair point. Mom guilt is stronger than anything. They'd bet on my love, on my need to be needed, to be the good mother, to keep the family together at any cost. And they'd almost been right." I saw myself through another's eyes that day, through Amanda's tear-filled gaze as she apologized over and over for not speaking up sooner, for being complicit through her silence. "You deserve so much better," she whispered, gripping my hands with hers, her skin cold and damp. "You deserve to be cherished, not exploited. You deserve sons who protect you, not prey on you. Those words cracked something open in my chest, some place I'd been keeping carefully sealed, because if I let myself feel how much this hurt, I might never stop crying. When had I stopped believing I deserved better? When had I accepted being treated as less than human by the people I'd sacrificed everything for? I thought about all the times I'd put their needs first. The vacation I'd canceled when Daniel needed money for his startup. The car I'd kept running 5 years past when I should have replaced it because Marcus was out of work and I was helping with his rent. The bakery dream I'd deferred and deferred and deferred until it seemed impossible, frivolous, selfish to even want something for myself. But Amanda's confession gave me something more valuable than evidence. It gave me clarity and righteous anger and the absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The plan took shape over the next month, carefully constructed with Patricia's legal expertise and Robert's investigative experience. Patricia filed the criminal complaint quietly, no press, no drama, just paperwork moving through the system, building a case while I moved through my life pretending everything was normal. The masquerade was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I accepted Daniel's invitation to Lily's 8th birthday party in May. I smiled through dinner at their expensive house, eating catered food from some trendy restaurant I'm sure I indirectly paid for. I hugged my granddaughter and pretended not to notice how Daniel and Jessica exchanged relieved glances across the dining room, probably thinking I'd let it go like they knew I would, like I always had. Like the good mother who'd never make waves, never cause problems, never choose herself over her children's comfort. The masquerade was exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every interaction felt like walking on broken glass barefoot, maintaining this facade of the confused, forgiving mother, while cold rage calcified in my chest with every fake smile, every false laugh, every moment I had to pretend I didn't know what they'd done. There was a close call at that birthday party, a moment when I almost got caught and the whole plan nearly unraveled. Lily asked me why I looked sad. Her 7-year-old perception was cutting through my performance like it was nothing, seeing what the adults refused to acknowledge. "Grandma, why do you look sad?" She tugged on my sleeve, her little face scrunched up with concern. "You're smiling, but your eyes are sad. Did someone make you cry?" "I'm just tired, sweetheart," I told her, and it wasn't entirely a lie. I was tired. Tired of being used. Tired of loving people who saw that love as leverage. Tired of the constant vigilance required to maintain my act, to not let them see how much I knew, how much I was planning. Daniel overheard Lily's question and swooped in, putting his arm around my shoulders in a show of filial concern, all caring son for the other parents watching. "You should rest more, Mom," he said loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. "We worry about you, living alone, managing everything yourself. Maybe it's time to think about making some changes, getting some help." I could feel Jessica watching us from across the room, a small smile on her face, and I realized this was all part of their plan too, this public performance of concern, building a narrative of my incompetence that would justify whatever they did next. "Oh, you're so good to worry," I said, patting his hand like I didn't know it was the same hand that had forged my signature 8 times. Like I didn't know he was counting down the days until I was incapacitated enough that he could take everything without the inconvenience of forgery. Like I wasn't building a legal case that would destroy the comfortable life he'd built on stolen money. I smiled at the other parents, played my part perfectly, and wondered if any of them could see the truth behind the Norman Rockwell painting we were all pretending to inhabit. I started making changes they wouldn't notice immediately, careful moves that would protect me while keeping them confident in their success. I closed the accounts they'd been accessing and opened new ones at Chase instead of First National, transferred everything they hadn't already stolen into accounts with my name only, accounts secured with passwords they couldn't guess and security questions they couldn't answer. I changed my beneficiaries, removing Daniel and Marcus entirely, replacing them with Lily in a trust they couldn't touch and charities I'd always wanted to support. I updated my will with Patricia's help, establishing a trust for Lily that neither of her parents could touch until she turned 25. The trust would pay for her education, her living expenses while in college, maybe a down payment on her first home someday. But Daniel and Jessica would never see a penny of it, never be able to use her as justification for their greed. Patricia also helped me establish a healthcare power of attorney with an independent third party, a professional fiduciary service, so Daniel couldn't claim medical authority over me if I ever did become incapacitated. Every legal maneuver felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, like taking back territory they'd occupied in my life. I was building walls where there had only been open doors, establishing boundaries where I'd allowed unlimited access. It felt strange and sad and absolutely necessary. Then I set the trap. I called Daniel on a Tuesday afternoon in June, made my voice small and uncertain. Everything they expected from confused, elderly Mother Clara. "Honey," I said, "I've been thinking about what you said at Lily's party, about making some changes, getting help. I'm just so tired of managing everything, the bills and the accounts, and keeping track of it all." I paused for effect, and I thought, maybe you were right that day in the garage. Maybe I do need help handling my finances. The silence on the other end of the line lasted just a fraction too long, and I could practically hear his brain recalibrating, surprise giving way to satisfaction. I watched his eyes light up with predatory satisfaction when we met for coffee the next day at a Starbucks in his neighborhood, one of those carefully designed spaces that look like a living room cosplaying as a coffee shop. "That's a really mature decision, Mom," he said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "I'm really proud of you for recognizing your limitations. It takes real strength to ask for help." He took the bait so completely, it was almost sad. Within a week, he'd sent me information about assisted living facilities with memory care units, about financial advisors who could help me, about setting up power of attorney so he could manage everything for me. The paperwork arrived by email, professionally formatted, probably copied from some legal template he'd found online. All I had to do was sign, and he'd take care of everything. The irony was so heavy I could barely breathe under the weight of it. Instead of signing, I forwarded it to Patricia with a note. "Is this enough?" Her response was immediate. "More than enough. This demonstrates ongoing intent to commit fraud and financial exploitation. We have him." The final piece fell into place when Marcus called to say they wanted to have a family meeting. "Just us," he said, his voice carefully casual. "Me, you, Daniel, our wives. To talk about your future and how we can all support you better. Make sure you're taken care of." The words sounded caring, but I knew what they meant now. I could hear the subtext in every syllable. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in July at the Lincoln Park house. I confirmed I'd be there, my voice grateful and relieved, playing the part of the tired old woman who was so grateful her sons cared enough to manage her life. Then I hung up and called Patricia and Robert. The plan was simple, elegant, devastating. I'd go to the meeting, listen to their proposal, agree to everything they suggested, sign nothing, and watch their faces when the police showed up with arrest warrants. But fate, or perhaps my own instinct for poetic justice, offered something better. The day before the meeting, I got a call from my new bank's personal banker, a kind woman named Sarah Chen, no relation, who'd helped me set up my new accounts. "Mrs. Chen," she said, her voice troubled, "I wanted to give you a heads up. Your son Daniel tried to access one of your accounts this morning. He came into our Michigan Avenue branch with what he claimed was a power of attorney document. Our system flagged it because we don't have any POA on file for you." The last thread of doubt I'd been carrying, the tiny voice that said maybe I was wrong, maybe there was some explanation, maybe they'd learned their lesson and stopped, died in that moment. He was so confident I'd fall in line, so certain I'd sign those papers at the family meeting, that he'd already started acting like he controlled my money. He couldn't even wait one more day. The arrogance of it, the absolute certainty that I would bend to his will, made me see red. "What did you tell him?" I asked Sarah, keeping my voice steady. "We told him we couldn't provide any information without proper documentation, and that you'd need to come in personally to add anyone to your accounts. He wasn't happy about it. Sarah paused. Mrs. Chen, should I be concerned? Do you need me to flag your accounts for potential fraud? Yes, I said. Flag everything. And thank you for calling me. Sarah had no idea how much that phone call meant, how it was the final confirmation I needed that I was doing the right thing. The next morning, I dressed carefully. My best blue dress, the one I wore to parent-teacher conferences when I needed to project authority, when I had to tell parents their child was failing and it was partially their fault for not establishing better homework habits. Pearl earrings that had been my mother's, sensible heels that made me 2 inches taller. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw someone I'd forgotten existed, a woman who knew her worth, who wouldn't be dismissed or diminished or defrauded. Patricia and Robert would meet me there, but they'd arrive separately, waiting nearby until I gave them the signal. The police were on standby, ready to execute the arrest warrants as soon as I confirmed Daniel and Marcus had attempted to get me to sign fraudulent documents. Everything was choreographed down to the minute, every detail planned. I arrived at the Lincoln Park house at 10 a.m. sharp. The morning was beautiful, sunny and mild, the kind of Chicago summer day that makes you forget about the brutal winters. Daniel's street was quiet, tree-lined, peaceful, full of young families who'd bought into this neighborhood's promise of safety and community. I wondered how they'd react when police cars showed up in an hour. Whether they'd talk about it at their block parties, whisper about the nice-looking family who turned out to be criminals. Daniel and Jessica were in the living room with Marcus and his wife, Stephanie, all of them arranged like a tribunal waiting to pass judgment. The room smelled like expensive candle wax and fresh flowers, probably from Jessica's garden. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers. The papers were already spread on the coffee table. Power of attorney documents, trust transfers, account access forms. Everything they needed to legally steal what they'd been stealing illegally, to complete their takeover of my financial life. "Welcome, Mom," Daniel said, standing to kiss my cheek like this was a normal family gathering, like we were about to have brunch instead of a hostile takeover. "Thanks for being open to this. I know change is hard, but we're all here to support you." Jessica smiled from the couch, her expression warm and false. Marcus fidgeted with his phone, and Stephanie just looked uncomfortable, like she wasn't entirely sure why she'd been summoned to witness this. I sat down in the armchair they'd clearly designated for me, folded my hands in my lap, and smiled. "Before we start," I said pleasantly, conversationally, like the thought had just occurred to me, "I need to make one stop. Just a quick errand at the bank. I want to verify my current account balances before we do any transfers. Make sure I have all the numbers right. We can all go together, make it official, with witnesses." The looks they exchanged were almost comical, quick glances that telegraphed panic and frustration. Daniel stood, his smile going tight around the edges. "Mom, we can do the bank later," he said, his voice carefully reasonable. "Let's just get the paperwork sorted first, get everything signed, and then we can go verify numbers or whatever you want." I stood too, smoothing my dress, meeting his eyes with a level gaze. "I insist," I said, my voice sweet as honey and hard as steel underneath. "I think it's important we do this right, don't you? With witnesses. Make everything completely legal and above board." The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Jessica's smile had frozen on her face. Marcus stopped fidgeting and stared at me like he was seeing something he didn't recognize. I could feel them recalculating, trying to figure out if I suspected something, or if this was just old woman stubbornness, if they should push back or go along. Finally, Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. "Of course, Mom. Whatever makes you comfortable." The drive to the bank was tense, the 15-minute trip feeling like hours. They followed in Daniel's car, probably discussing whether I was having second thoughts, whether they needed to push harder, whether I was about to ruin everything they'd planned. I parked in front of Chicago First National's main branch, a beautiful old building with marble columns and brass fixtures that had been there since the 1920s. Patricia and Robert were waiting inside, seated near the manager's office like regular customers, reading newspapers and checking their phones, invisible in the morning foot traffic. The moment we walked through those heavy brass doors, I felt the shift in power. This was my territory now, my stage, my moment. The marble floor clicked under my sensible heels. The vaulted ceiling soared overhead, making every sound echo. Other customers moved through their banking business, unaware they were about to witness something extraordinary. I walked straight to the counter, past the regular tellers to the platform where the assistant manager sat. Daniel, Jessica, and Marcus clustered behind me, uncertain now, their confident facades starting to show cracks. "Good morning," I said to the assistant manager, a young man named Tom who'd helped me open my new accounts, who'd been briefed by Sarah about what was coming. "I need to show my family something." I placed my purse on the counter and pulled out my new passbook, the one showing the Chase account they didn't know existed, the account where I'd transferred everything, every penny they hadn't already stolen. Tom understood immediately. His eyes met mine for just a second, acknowledgement and support, before he turned to his computer. "Of course, Mrs. Chen. Let me pull up your balance." He turned the screen so it faced outward. The numbers glowed in crisp digital clarity. $78,000. Not the empty account they'd expected. Not the vulnerable nest egg they'd been systematically draining, that they'd thought was still ripe for the taking. Money I'd moved, protected, secured before they could take anything else. Behind me, I heard Daniel's sharp intake of breath. Jessica made a small sound, almost like a whimper. Marcus just stood there, frozen, his face draining of color. I pulled out the second passbook then, the old First National one, the account they had been accessing. The one now marked "closed" with a zero balance printed in red. "Would you like to verify these statements?" I asked, my voice steady and clear, projecting so the other customers could hear if they were paying attention. Tom printed them both. The machine hummed and clicked, the paper sliding out with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the suddenly silent lobby. Other customers were starting to notice. A woman with a toddler paused mid-transaction at the next window. An elderly man near the ATM turned to watch, sensing drama with the instinct of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize when something significant was happening. This is the moment I'd been building toward for 6 months, and I wanted witnesses. I wanted people to see this, to remember it, to maybe learn something from it. I laid the statements on the counter like evidence at trial, precise and deliberate. "This account," I said, pointing to the closed one with its damning transaction history, was accessed 8 times over 8 months using forged signatures. $22,000 stolen by my son, Daniel Chen, and his brother, Marcus Chen. I turned to face them fully, turning my back on the counter so I could see their faces, so they had to see mine. They were frozen. Marcus actually backing toward the door like he was considering running. Daniel's face had gone white, then red, a flush of anger or shame creeping up his neck. Jessica looked like she might faint, one hand pressed to her chest, her breathing shallow and quick. "This account," I continued, indicating the active passbook with its substantial balance, "contains my actual savings. The money you didn't manage to steal. The money you'll never touch." Daniel found his voice, but it came out strangled, desperate. "Mom, you're confused," he said, loud enough for the gathering audience to hear. "We were trying to help. You asked us to help manage your accounts. You were having trouble. We have emails about this." The lies still came, even now, even caught red-handed. I'd been waiting for that line. I'd known he'd try one last gaslighting attempt, one last effort to make me doubt my own sanity in front of witnesses. "Tom," I said, still looking at Daniel, still holding his gaze so he could see I wasn't confused, wasn't uncertain, wasn't the vulnerable mark he'd thought he was robbing. "Would you please call the number on this card?" I handed Tom Patricia's business card without breaking eye contact with my son. "She's my attorney, and she has documentation of everything, including the forged signatures, the practice sheets we found in your home office, and the emails discussing my supposed cognitive decline. I let that sink in for a moment, watched understanding dawn on Daniel's face, the realization that I'd known for months, that I'd been investigating, gathering evidence, building a case while he thought I was just a confused old woman. Also, I continued, my voice cold and clear, Detective Harrison at the Chicago Police Department has been expecting my call. The blood drained from Daniel's face completely. You wouldn't? He whispered. And I heard in his voice the little boy who used to think I'd never really punish him, who'd learned over years that Mom always forgave, always gave second chances, always chose family peace over consequences. Oh, but I would. I already have. As if on cue, the doors opened and Patricia walked in, Robert close behind. With them were 2 uniformed Chicago police officers, their badges catching the light from the overhead chandeliers. It was like watching a carefully choreographed play, except the audience was real and the consequences were permanent. The lobby had gone completely quiet. Every transaction had stopped. Every customer was watching now, this small domestic drama unfolding in their safe, boring bank branch. Daniel Chen, the lead officer said, stepping forward with his hand on his belt, near his handcuffs. Marcus Chen, you're both under arrest for identity theft, forgery, and financial exploitation of an elderly person. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The handcuffs clicked on with a sound that seemed to echo forever, metal on metal, the sound of consequences arriving at last. Jessica started crying, loud, messy sobs that other customers pretended not to hear out of politeness, that echoed off the marble floors and vaulted ceilings. She grabbed Daniel's arm as the officer led him away, her face contorted with grief and rage. "How could you do this?" she screamed at me, her carefully cultured composure shattered. "He's your son. Your son! You're destroying your own family." Marcus's wife Stephanie just stood there, her face slack with shock, her purse dangling from one arm, looking like she couldn't quite process what she was witnessing. "A betrayal this deep doesn't heal," I said to Daniel as the officer read him his rights, as the Miranda warning echoed through the lobby, as his life as he knew it ended. "It scars over if you're lucky. Maybe one day you'll understand what you destroyed. But today, you just get to understand you picked the wrong woman to underestimate." Daniel didn't say anything, didn't meet my eyes, just stared straight ahead as they led him toward the door, toward the police car waiting outside with its lights off, trying to preserve some dignity even as his world collapsed. They were led out through the brass doors, past the marble columns, into police cars visible through the tall windows. I watched until they disappeared from view, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, not vindication. Just a cold, clean emptiness where my love for them used to live, where the space reserved for maternal devotion had been carved out and replaced with something harder, something that could survive betrayal. The branch manager appeared at my elbow, an older man in an expensive suit who'd probably been watching from his office. "Mrs. Chen," he said, his voice low and professional, "I'm so sorry you went through this. We have resources if you need support, counseling services, financial advisors who specialize in recovery from fraud." I thanked him, gathered my passbooks, and walked out into the Chicago sunshine. The day was still beautiful, still mild and perfect. The world hadn't ended. It had just shifted. Patricia caught up to me on the sidewalk where tourists and business people streamed past us, unaware of what had just happened inside that dignified building. "That was incredibly brave," she said, her hand briefly touching my arm. The first human warmth I'd felt in hours. I shook my head, squinting in the bright sunlight. "It wasn't brave," I said. "It was survival. There's a difference." The legal proceedings took months, a grinding machinery of justice that moved at its own pace, regardless of human suffering. arraignments and bail hearings and preliminary conferences and a seemingly endless parade of legal procedures. But the outcome was never in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged signatures matched to practice sheets found in Daniel's home office, email confessions between Daniel and Jessica, Marcus's Venmo transactions, Amanda's testimony about their planning. Daniel's lawyer tried every angle, argued that this was a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion, that I'd given permission verbally even if I didn't remember, that my memory issues had created this whole situation. The prosecution played the recordings of Daniel's and Marcus's phone calls, the ones where they dismissed my concerns and told me to let it go. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Daniel and Marcus were both convicted on all counts. Daniel got 2 years in a minimum security facility and was ordered to pay full restitution plus damages. Marcus got 18 months and his own restitution order. The sentences felt simultaneously too harsh and too lenient. How do you quantify in prison time the destruction of trust, the theft of security, the systematic abuse of love? How do you measure in months behind bars the damage done to my faith in humanity, to my ability to trust my own judgment? The financial restitution was ordered but would take years to collect, maybe decades. I didn't care about the money anymore, not really. The civil suits that followed gave me something better than money. Daniel and Jessica's house in Lincoln Park had to be sold to pay damages. The beautiful brownstone with its original crown molding and skylights, the house I'd helped them buy, went on the market and sold quickly in a hot real estate market. Marcus's condo went too, a modern high-rise unit in Wicker Park that he'd been so proud of. They lost everything they'd built on the foundation of stolen money, and I felt nothing watching it happen. Actually, that's not true. I felt something when the rest of the family turned their backs on them. Aunts and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years called to apologize, to say they'd suspected something wasn't right about Daniel's sudden financial success, to offer support I no longer needed but accepted anyway because it felt good to be seen, to be believed. Cousins sent cards, flowers, messages on Facebook about how sorry they were, how they wished they'd known, how they wished they could have helped. Even my ex-husband reached out, uncomfortable and awkward, calling me from his retirement community in Florida where he lived with the woman he'd left me for 30 years ago. "I never raised them to be like this," he said, his voice gravelly with age and regret. "I know I wasn't there much. I know I failed them in a lot of ways, but I never taught them this." He apologized, actually apologized for things I'd stopped expecting apologies for decades ago, and I accepted it because anger takes energy I didn't want to spend anymore. The family rallied around me in their guilt and their horror, and I accepted their apologies with the same cold politeness I'd given Daniel's lies. "Where were you?" I wanted to ask them, "when I was alone and doubting my own sanity? When I was the one being gaslit and stolen from and systematically abused?" But I didn't ask because I'd learned something valuable through all of this. The only person you can truly depend on is yourself. Everyone else is conditional, temporary, capable of looking away when looking at the truth is uncomfortable. Jessica's family cut ties with Daniel completely. They'd known about the theft, or at least Amanda had told them after her confession to me, and they'd been horrified. Jessica's mother called me to apologize for raising a daughter who could participate in something so cruel. I didn't know what to say to that, how to comfort someone else's guilt, so I just thanked her and hung up. Amanda kept in touch with me, sending occasional texts, checking in, asking how I was doing, always careful not to mention Jessica or the trial or anything that might upset me. She'd lost her sister over this, chosen truth over family loyalty, and I respected that even though I couldn't fully forgive her initial silence. Lily stopped speaking to her parents entirely when she was old enough to understand what they'd done. That hurt worse than anything else, all of it. Worse than the theft or the trial or the empty space where my sons used to be in my life. She was 10 when the trial ended, old enough to understand that her parents had stolen from Grandma Clara, that they'd lied about it, that they'd been sent to prison for it, old enough to feel betrayed herself. I tried to maintain a relationship with her, invited her for our weekly tutoring sessions, sent birthday cards and Christmas presents, called to check on her. But she associated me with her parents' downfall, couldn't separate my justified actions from her unjust suffering. By the time she was 12, she'd moved in with Jessica's parents and changed her last name to theirs. The final severance, the last connection cut, and I had to accept it because forcing a relationship would only hurt her more. With the dust settling, I found a new breath of life in simplifying things, in stripping away everything complicated and painful and just building something clean. I sold my Northside apartment, the one where I'd lived for 20 years, where I'd cried myself to sleep after my divorce and after the fraud calls and after confronting Daniel. It held too many ghosts, too many memories of being less than I was. I bought a small cottage in Evanston, just north of the city, a 1920s bungalow with original hardwood floors and a fireplace that actually worked. It had a garden where I could grow herbs and tomatoes and the kinds of flowers that attracted bees and butterflies. It had a kitchen with south-facing windows, perfect for baking, sunlight streaming in all afternoon, and enough counter space to actually work. For the first time in my adult life, I lived somewhere I'd chosen entirely for myself, not because it was close to my sons, not because it was affordable enough to leave money for their emergencies, not because of anyone but me. I enrolled in a business course at Oakton Community College. At 69 years old, I started learning about profit margins and business plans and health department regulations. The other students were mostly in their 20s, fresh-faced kids who'd probably never experienced real betrayal or loss, who thought getting a low grade on a test was the worst thing that could happen to them. At first, they looked at me like I was someone's confused grandmother who'd wandered into the wrong classroom, probably taking the course for fun, something to pass the time. But I kept showing up, kept asking questions that came from decades of actually managing budgets and negotiating contracts and dealing with the real-world problems these textbooks tried to reduce to case studies. I kept taking notes in my careful teacher's handwriting, the same precise cursive I'd taught to hundreds of children over 40 years. I got an A in the class, scored higher than most of the 20-somethings who'd assumed I was there to kill time before death. 6 months after Daniel's conviction, I opened Clara's Corner Bakery in a small storefront in downtown Evanston. It wasn't fancy, just 600 square feet with 6 small tables, a display case I bought used from a closing coffee shop, an industrial oven I saved for month by month. The floors were original tile from the 1950s, cracked in places but charming. The walls were exposed brick that I didn't have to pay to expose because they'd always been that way. But it was mine. Built with money I'd protected, decorated with dreams I'd reclaimed from the box in the back of my mind labeled someday. The bakery specialized in the same apple pie I'd been making that Sunday afternoon when the first fraud call came through. I'd reclaimed it, taken it back from the memory of betrayal, and made it mine again. I also made lemon bars from my mother's recipe, chocolate chip cookies with sea salt on top, sourdough bread that I started from scratch with a starter I'd cultivated myself. The bread sold out every morning by 9 a.m., locals forming a small line before I opened at 7, waiting for the warm, crusty loaves that filled the shop with the smell of yeast and butter and thyme. I hired 2 part-time employees, both women over 50, who'd been told by other employers that they were too old to start over, that they should probably just retire, that nobody wanted to train someone who might not be around in 5 years. Martha was 55, a former accountant whose firm had downsized her out of a job. Denise was 62, a grandmother who'd raised 4 kids and was looking for something that was hers. We proved otherwise daily. We 3 women who refused to be dismissed, who knew our worth and demanded others recognize it too. My wealth wasn't measured in dollars anymore, though the bakery turned a modest profit after the first year, enough to pay Martha and Denise fair wages and cover my own expenses with a little left over. My net worth couldn't be calculated on a balance sheet. It was in the quiet pride of opening my own door each morning at 6 a.m., of flipping the sign from closed to open, of seeing customers choose my food and smile when they tasted it. It was in the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with my own hands, in the freedom of owing nothing to anyone, in the peace of a life built on truth instead of family obligation. I invested in my business and in my peace, and both grew steadily. I bought better equipment when I could afford it. I expanded the menu slowly, testing new recipes on Sundays when the shop was closed, perfecting them before offering them to customers. I invested in my cottage garden, in therapy sessions with a counselor who specialized in family trauma, in art classes at the community center because I'd always wondered if I could paint. Daniel sent letters from prison, carefully written appeals that tried different angles. Some were apologetic, claiming he'd been under financial stress and made terrible choices. Some were angry, accusing me of overreacting and destroying the family. Some were manipulative, reminding me of good times we'd had, of his childhood, of how much he missed me. I didn't read them past the first few lines. I returned them unopened, marked refused, a boundary I maintained because reading them would mean letting him back into my head, my heart, my peace. Marcus called when he was released after serving 14 months with time off for good behavior. I saw his number on my caller ID and stared at it for the 6 rings before it went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He called again 3 days later, and again I didn't answer. On the 4th call, he left a voicemail, his voice small and uncertain. "Mom, it's me. I know you probably don't want to talk to me. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm sorry. I'm really, truly sorry. If you ever want to." He didn't finish the sentence. I deleted it without listening to it again. There was a time when that would have devastated me, cutting off my children completely, refusing to answer their calls or read their letters or give them the forgiveness they wanted. But they'd cut themselves off when they chose greed over love, theft over trust, exploitation over respect. The bridge had been burned from their side, not mine. I was just refusing to rebuild it with my own charred bones. Sometimes late at night in my cottage, lying in bed listening to wind chimes I'd hung on the back porch, I'd think about what I'd lost. 2 sons I'd raised and loved for more than 3 decades. A daughter-in-law I'd welcomed into the family, taught to make pie crust, helped pick out baby furniture for. A granddaughter who carried my mother's middle name, who had my eyes, who I'd never see grow up. The family dinners and birthday parties and ordinary moments that make up a life that I'd always assumed would be mine until I died. All of it gone, erased, reduced to memories I couldn't even enjoy anymore because they were tainted with the knowledge of what came after. But I'd gained something too, myself. The woman I'd been before marriage and motherhood had demanded I become smaller, softer, more convenient for other people's comfort. The woman I could have been if I hadn't spent 40 years putting everyone else's needs ahead of my own dreams. I'd found her again in a bank lobby in Lincoln Park, laying down statements like weapons, refusing to be diminished. And I liked her better than the woman I'd been. The 1-year anniversary of their arrest, I closed the bakery early and drove to Lake Michigan. I sat on a bench overlooking the water at Gilson Beach, watching the sun set over Chicago's skyline, the buildings catching the light and glowing like they were on fire. The city lights began to flicker on one by one, office windows and street lamps and the headlights of cars on Lakeshore Drive. The water lapped at the beach with a rhythm that was older than all my problems, older than family betrayal, older than human disappointment. I sat there until the sky went from orange to purple to black, and I thought about all the people out there in those glowing buildings, navigating their own betrayals, their own battles, their own transformations. How many of them were trapped in relationships that hurt them but felt impossible to leave? How many were being stolen from, lied to, manipulated by the people who claimed to love them? How many were choosing silence over consequences because they couldn't bear to destroy their families? I thought about the research I'd done during those dark months of investigation, the academic articles about financial abuse and its effects, how it affects the body and mind in measurable ways, how it weaponizes love and trust, how it makes you doubt the reality right in front of your face. I thought about the symptoms I'd experienced, the depression, the anxiety, the physical exhaustion that came from chronic stress. All of it real, all of it documented, all of it preventable if I'd recognized the signs earlier. If there's one thing you take away from my story, it's this. Emotional abuse and financial exploitation don't just steal your money. They steal your sense of self, your confidence, your ability to trust your own judgment. The effects are real, scientifically documented, and devastating. Depression, anxiety, physical illness, all triggered by the chronic stress of being manipulated by people who claim to love you. I'd experienced every symptom cataloged in those research papers. The exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. The brain fog that made simple decisions feel impossible, the way I'd stopped caring about my own future, stopped planning, stopped dreaming. All of it was my body and mind responding to sustained abuse. But here's what they don't tell you in the research papers. What you can't measure in clinical studies. You can heal. It takes work, professional support, probably therapy, and definitely legal help, and an iron determination to reclaim what was stolen. But you can come back from it. You can be stronger than before, not despite the betrayal, but because of it. Because surviving forces you to find resources you didn't know you had. You can rebuild yourself into something harder and truer and more honest than you were when you could afford to be soft. The signs are always there if you're willing to see them. Sudden interest in your finances from family members who never cared before. Pressure to sign documents without time to review them. Urgency that doesn't make sense. Gaslighting when you question inconsistencies. Being told you're remembering wrong or confused or making problems out of nothing. Isolation from friends or other family members who might notice what's happening, who might ask questions or offer alternative perspectives. If you recognize these patterns in your own life, trust your instincts. They're probably right. Document everything. Keep detailed records with dates and times and exact quotes. Open a separate bank account they don't know about and start protecting some money. Seek legal advice from an attorney who specializes in elder law or financial abuse. Protect your assets by changing passwords and security questions, by adding extra layers of verification to your accounts. Don't wait like I did, hoping love would be enough to stop the people who claim to care about you. Love isn't enough when it's being used as a weapon against you. I won't pretend the ending is fairy tale perfect, that justice solved all my problems, and I lived happily ever after. My relationship with my sons is destroyed, probably permanently. They're out of prison now, but we haven't spoken in over 2 years, and I don't expect that to change. Lily may never forgive me for the role I played in her parents' downfall, even though I was the victim, even though my only crime was refusing to be stolen from. She's 14 now, probably going to high school, probably dating, probably doing all the things I'll never know about. The money I recovered doesn't erase the years of anxiety and self-doubt, doesn't give me back the version of my family I thought I had, but I have something more valuable than a perfect ending. I have my dignity. I have my independence, my autonomy, my right to make decisions about my own life without interference or manipulation. I have a business I built from dreams I'd buried for decades, from ashes I thought were cold and dead. I have mornings in my cottage garden, watching tomatoes ripen and bees collect pollen. My hands in the soil doing work that feels clean and honest. I have afternoons in my bakery kitchen, teaching Martha how to get the perfect flaky crust, laughing with Denise about terrible customers, creating food that brings people simple joy. I have evenings reading books I choose because I want to, not because I'm too tired from being someone's emotional and financial resource, too drained to have preferences of my own. I have the freedom to spend my money on myself without guilt, to take a weekend trip to Door County just because the leaves are changing, to buy expensive cheese at the farmer's market just because it looks good, to invest in my own happiness without justifying every purchase to myself or anyone else. Most importantly, I have the knowledge that when tested, when pushed to the breaking point by people I loved more than myself, I didn't break. I fought back with every resource I had, with intelligence and patience and cold calculation. I won. Not just the legal battle, though I won that too, but the war for my own soul, the fight to remain a person who could look at herself in the mirror without shame. I chose myself, and that choice saved me. So here's my question for you, wherever you are, whenever you're hearing this. What would you have done? Would you have pressed charges against your own children, knowing it would send them to prison and destroy your relationship forever? Would you have been able to maintain that masquerade, pretending everything was fine while building a case against them, lying to their faces the way they'd lied to yours? Would you have had the strength to walk into that bank and expose them in public, to watch them be handcuffed and led away while you stood there with your passbook and your evidence? Or would you have chosen differently, forgiven them, tried to rebuild trust even after it had been shattered so completely? Would you have accepted their apologies and their promises to do better, given them another chance because they're your children, and doesn't a mother always give her children another chance? I'm genuinely curious because even now, 2 years after that morning at Chicago First National, I sometimes wonder if there was another way, a path that didn't end with my sons in prison and my granddaughter lost to me forever. But then I remember the forged signatures, sheets and sheets of practice, the emails calling me a resource to be managed, discussing my supposed cognitive decline as if it were fact instead of fiction they'd created, the casual cruelty of their entitlement, the way they'd bet on my love protecting them from consequences. And I know I made the only choice that let me look at myself in the mirror without shame, the only choice that preserved my integrity even as it destroyed my family. I chose truth over comfort, justice over peace, myself over them, and I would make the same choice again. If my story resonates with you, if you've experienced anything similar, or if you're experiencing it right now, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, what time it is in your city right now, whether you think I did the right thing or if you think I went too far. Hit that like button if you think I made the right choice, or tell me in the comments if you think there was a better way, if you see an option I missed. What matters most to me is that my experience helps someone else recognize the warning signs before they lose as much as I did, before they end up sitting in a bank lobby laying down evidence against their own children. Before I go, I want to point you to 2 other stories on this channel. There's one about a woman who discovered her husband's decade-long affair through a grocery store receipt and how she systematically dismantled his life before filing for divorce. And another about a father who cut his entitled adult children out of his inheritance after they tried to put him in a nursing home against his will so they could sell his house. Both stories might give you a different perspective on family, loyalty, and the complicated mathematics of love and justice, on when it's right to fight back and when forgiveness is the stronger choice. Subscribe if you want more real stories about real people navigating the messy, painful, triumphant business of reclaiming their lives from people who tried to take them. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss new stories. And remember, your mental health is as important as your financial health. Your peace of mind is worth protecting, even from the people who are supposed to protect it for you, even from the people you love most in the world. Trust your gut, document everything, and never let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is selfish. Self-preservation isn't selfish, it's survival. Until the next story, take care of your heart, and your bank account, and yourself, because at the end of the day, you're the only person who will be there for you unconditionally. Everyone else is conditional, temporary, capable of betrayal you never saw coming. Build your life on the foundation of your own strength, not on the hope that other people will treat you